Hey everybody, Jenna K here. Today I wanted to talk some more about trauma. Who better to explain trauma than somebody that has experience? Just a little bit about me. I'm a former therapist. I have a degree in psychology, and I pursued those avenues because I needed to understand myself. And so, what I've discovered is there are more people likely than not that have experienced some sort of trauma in their life. When we experience things in childhood, sometimes it persists into adulthood in ways we don't understand. And for those that haven't experienced trauma, they're looking at us going like, "Oh my gosh, why are you behaving that way?" or "Why did you react that way?" Where generally there's an explanation. So with education becomes awareness. So this segment I'm going to talk about trauma, what it is from a clinical perspective, and some other traits that carry on even if you don't have that clinical diagnosis. And then other things that I'm going to be doing in just different segments will be, for example, I wrote them down because I've just got, I've got idea after idea. So this is going to be an ongoing process. For example, why do people that have had narcissistic parents or that have experienced trauma in childhood tend to choose people in adulthood that have those narcissistic traits? What is codependency, and how does codependency manifest when you've had trauma in either one part of the relationship or another? Um, how do childhood experiences? There's this study called the ACEs study. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Checklist, even, that helps identify. I mean, it's not concrete, but it gives you some idea that if you've experienced some of these traumas during childhood, they can manifest into mental health conditions or even physical health conditions in adulthood. What we experience as children impacts relationships. It develops, how we secure, how we attach, how we respond, what communication styles we have. So hopefully you'll follow along. I'm only going to do one segment at a time because there's just so much information and I don't want to be too overwhelming. And plus, when you open this topic, it just keeps going and going and going. If it doesn't apply to you, please do share it with somebody that it might apply to. And again, if you feel like you're having difficulties, if you're having experiences that you can't make sense of, it's always okay to reach out to a professional. If the first professional isn't a good match for you, keep trying until you find someone that is. I encourage that, right? If you go to the first doctor and you don't get a good response from the doctor, find someone else. Eventually, you'll find someone that you're a good match with. It's all about safety, and it's all about trust, and it's all about opening up to the right person. So, okay, so trauma, it can affect everyone differently, right? There's no one size fits all. And when it does apply, if I can give you a personal experience, I will give you a personal experience. Some things are more debilitating than others. Some people hold on to the trauma in different ways for certain reasons. Sometimes, if we're not feeling so good when these events happen, we're able to deal with it. We are resilient folks. And just because you have trauma or have a diagnosis of post traumatic stress disorder, there are coping mechanisms that we can develop and use in times of crisis. So I did a video about defense mechanisms. That's just one of them. And some defense mechanisms are healthy, some are not, some are adaptive, some are maladaptive. It's just how we deal with things in life. So again, it's all about education. So for some of us, trauma has a significant mental health effect. For others, it might manifest even in physical health problems. Your body can only fight so much at one time. If your brain is focused on dealing with this and it's in crisis right now, it might not be strong enough to focus on maybe the underlying conditions. So, an example, let's say you have um, cancer that's been undiagnosed, and this is an extreme. Let's say you fall off the roof and then you have a shoulder injury. Your body might have been able to suppress and keep the cancer condition under control. But as soon as you had the other injury, it had to take some of its strong resources and apply it to your other injury, which then sometimes exacerbates and takes the strength off of one. So, same thing with your body is fighting a mental health condition. Sometimes the stress, the anxiety can result in all kinds of different physical health conditions. You know, I'll do another module on how that is because this is going to open another can of worms. So, how you deal with trauma depends on many things. For example, your temperament, your resources, and your environment. Do you have a safe place to process through it? Do you have the resources, the support network, the professionals, the education to deal with it in a logical, not illogical way? Your temperament, are you quick to rush to the negativity, or do you tend to take on some positivity? Do you try to explain away and make sense of things? Sometimes in trauma, you just can't make sense of things. So having that lack of closure, having that lack of um, common sense to attach to it, sometimes can cause its own problem in its own right. Okay, so let's look at the signs and symptoms. Please like again and subscribe so you can talk about this segments. Okay. So to actually get a physical a diagnosis of post-PTSD, you have to follow the criteria in the DSM-5. You can see I use it a lot. I open it up because it makes sense. Now the DSM-5 is a textbook study, and it gives us clinicians, medical providers, something to kind of narrow down the condition by. It doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. It gives us a point of direction so we can develop what we call a treatment plan, right? An area of emphasis, what to focus on. A lot of times when professionals do an assessment, they're asking all of these questions to do rule outs. Okay, that's not a problem, but maybe these things are, because we want to tailor our approach to the things that are going to make the most difference to improve the quality of life and not further harm the things that are difficult. So, certain things need to be met to receive that PTS diagnosis. So, here are a few. The individual must have direct or indirect exposure to a traumatic event. The symptoms are present for 1 month or longer. Significant distress or impairment in functioning, such as relationships, work, or cognition. In addition, they have other criteria. I was reading through this and it was just a little illogical. In addition, the DSM, our little handy dandy purple book here, has established other criteria, right? They diagnose it and they have like subcategories. So one or more intrusive symptom linked to the traumatic event. Okay, so a symptom that's directly related to the cause, the event. Now, PTSD doesn't have to be a singular event, but it can be. It can be events that occurred over time, like domestic violence. It can be things that layer up as the result of, or it can be because of an event that was unprocessed and unresolved, and other events tend to get layered up. And then pretty soon you have kind of like an onion where you've got the core root, then you've got layers and layers and layers of other stuff. Where unless you start to work on the layers, peel back the layers, you never get to the core root or the original cause of the trauma in the first place. And I'm not explaining this very well, so I might have to do a couple of different takes. I'm a little nervous, which is unusual because this is something that's very, very important to me that I work through a lot. It's because I've had to, right? How am I going to cope with life if I don't understand it? So trauma is something that, I deal with on a daily basis. Some days are easy to deal with. Some days are not so easy to deal with. So um, I also, this one really does relate to me, constant avoidance of anything related to the traumatic event. So I try to eliminate harm and avoid risk. So if I know that walking into a situation is either going to be triggering or it's going to be a reminder or it's going to hit me in harm's way, I just won't do it, right? I just will avoid it with everything that I am. So a maladaptive way that I have adapted to this or adjusted to this is I don't leave my house. I'm safe here. I'm secure here. I'm less likely to encounter traumatic events in my safe place. So I know that's something I have to work on, and I will be continuing to work on it with the help of my friends, my professionals, and the people that know me well. They know why I do it. There's no secret and there's no shame in having trauma. It is a culmination of things that happen to us, and now we have to learn to adjust, to adapt to them. Okay. So another criteria that must be met according to the Purple DSM-5 book is significant changes in mood or cognition associated with a traumatic event. So my mood changes when there's a reminder. I have that flight response, my demeanor changes, I panic. I also, which is a crazy thing, I just stored the information as a safety mechanism, and I don't do it consciously, I do it subconsciously. Um, I block out as many of the details of this period of time that happened to me that causes me distress. And sometimes, like if you're in a car accident, you won't remember all the details, you won't remember the afters, but you'll remember the feelings. For in my case, it was some things from childhood, which I'll discuss in the other segments that it relates to. But mine was 15 years of domestic violence every day from sunup to sundown. So I have taken those 15 years and kind of locked it up and I'm going to use a proverbial box with duct tape wrapped around it so that I don't have to open it up and deal with it. That's unhealthy. And those things are starting to come back to the surface, and that's scary. So, which I'm struggling with those little things right now, but it's necessary. And I feel like I'm strong enough for the most part to deal with those things. But yes, so when you ask somebody about their traumatic event, when they look confused, in awe, or like they really don't remember, it's not them being defensive. It's not them hiding things. Sometimes we really genuinely have blocked and don't remember. I get things out of order. It's been good. I've gotten out a box of pictures to kind of go through to kind of help remind me that there were good times during that 15 years, but it's also to reinforce and then allow me to remember the good things so I can focus on some of the things that weren't so good during that time frame. So that's why some of this is coming into the surface, and I figure since it is, I might as well share. Okay. So when we have trauma, sometimes we our alertness is a little bit different than most. So I am hyper vigilant. I have an incredible startle response. I'm sitting here right now and my back is to the entry door. I've got stairs into my kitchen and it's blocked off just because lights are weird. And I've got a chihuahua that goes up and down the stairs. It's for a matter of reasons. But generally speaking, when I'm in a public place, I never have my back to the door. And I do not like when people walk up on me. I don't like when I'm approached by strangers. I have an incredible startle response. It's and it's a jump. It's like when you walk up and you tickle somebody from behind. I have that. And it's just because I'm hyper vigilant. We have certain reactions to things because of our trauma. And I'll talk about those specific physical triggers in another segment. So please do follow along. Okay, so what are the diagnoses are is that they significantly impact your life in terms of relationships, daily activities, and work. Yes, relationships. I trust no one. I know I don't. My attachment style, dating back from childhood, and what I experienced in this 15-year relationship is I do not bond. I do not put my walls down. I do not let anybody get close. That's unhealthy, but I know why I do it. I also, my daily activities, it impairs my daily activities, where I go, what I do, what I think, who I let in my circle. So, my house, for example, and I'm not hopefully going to disclose too much information and I'm not crazy, but I have um, my house protected, my circle is small. If you get to come in my house, you have reached that level of family and safety. Nobody gets in here unless I know that there is established trust. I will never in a million years put myself in a position to be abused and taken advantage of again. So that's just my protective measure, but that's what I've had to do to ensure that I am strong enough to deal with what I'm going through. So we adapt our lives to cope with and survive the effects of our trauma. So that's one of the criteria, that we have adapted to those things. Okay. If any symptoms of trauma are culturally sanctioned, they may not be actually considered as part of the diagnosis. So it's not very, we are, as clinicians, as medical providers, trained to be culturally aware and culturally competent. There aren't specific cultural considerations under this category in the DSM-5. I would guess in future volumes, maybe there will be, maybe there won't be. I just don't know. Right now, there is not. So there are certain types of symptoms associated with PTSD. The first ones that I want to talk about are intrusion symptoms. These are usually unwanted, persistent, and involuntary events. You may experience one or more intrusion symptoms for at least 1 month after the event. This is required in order for a mental health professional to reach a PTSD diagnosis. So let's say you have a car accident and tomorrow you're struggling with it and you're afraid, but over time it kind of dissipates and those things aren't as bothersome and they don't impair your quality of life in those areas that I already talked about. So they would not meet the qualifications, for example, in the DSM-5. However, if they persist for 1 month or longer, which they typically do, in my case, it's been a long, intrusive ride for me. It goes back to 2009 for me. It's gotten better over time. However, there are still certain things, certain symptoms, certain triggers, certain impacts that still impact my daily life. So for my case, it's persisted for 1 month or longer. Now, there are also intrusion. We had intrusion symptoms. The intrusion symptoms, I guess I jumped over this, may include distressing memories, dreams or nightmares about the event or emotions related to the event or events. So I have very vivid memories of what happened. I have dreams, I have significant nightmares, and when my nightmares happen, I wake up feeling like they just happened, like they were real, they were vivid, and I have to orientate myself to where I actually am. I have these very frequently. They're very raw. There's no rhyme or reason as to when they happen. Um, I have some medication. I try not to take a lot of it, but they do help suppress some of those nightmares so I can get a good restful sleep. For a while, I was so afraid to sleep, I just didn't, and that wasn't healthy either. So there are also dissociative reactions that appear on a spectrum and can go from flashbacks to temporary loss of awareness of my surroundings. So I've had times where I have been driving, for example. I live a long way from where these events occurred for me, but I can be driving and then all of a sudden what I'm seeing are the places and people and the things that don't make any sense because they're 1,800 miles away. So that's a flashback. Or I can be standing in a room, then pretty soon I can start to see things or the person or events or a reminder of those occurrences. I know that they're not real. I know that they're flashbacks, but boy, they bring back that wealth of emotion like they're happening right now. So dissociative reactions appear out of the blue. They form like flashbacks. They are a temporary loss of awareness. So for a moment, I really do have to question, okay, is it real? Where am I? I have to use grounding techniques to get me back to reality. Even though I know psychologically it's unreal, it feels like it's very real. So, intense distress when exposed to anything that resembles or symbolizes the event. So, here's my example, and this can apply to yours or the person that has trauma. You can relate to this maybe. If you have a diagnosis of PTSD, this might be one of the things that you experience as well. So, for example, my 15-year traumatic experience was at the hand of somebody that was in the Marine Corps. Not Marine Corps' fault, right? I don't blame them. But a sight of a Marine Corps uniform or thinking about the military or thinking about the smell or hearing something that reminds me, or a phrase. It's not the Marine Corps. Sometimes it's something that I'm extremely proud of, but then it also brings back the him, the what happened to me. It has nothing to do with the Marine Corps. The things that were involved around our lifetime during that 15 years could be triggering to bring me back to those feelings of, oh my gosh, here it comes again. So it can be something out of the blue. It can be feelings of out of control, feelings of being stuck, feelings of being claustrophobic. That's another thing. If I go to a car wash, the first time I did this, I could not understand why. That we are hyper vigilant when we have had a traumatic experience. I went into the car wash, my car was dirty. This wasn't the first time I'd been through it. It was the first time after my experiences where I drove through, the door closed, the lights started to flash, the soap in all of its different colors started to spray on the windshield. And I had a full blown panic attack. I was claustrophobic. I started to cry uncontrollably. I couldn't understand. This is ridiculous. What's going on? It's because I was hypersensitive to the stimuli. So the colors, the lights, the sounds, the feelings stuck. So it comes to us in different ways. In some ways we can't prevent. So now I know one way I can prevent it is either number one, I prepare myself to what it's going to look like before I go to the car wash, take somebody with me, or I just don't go, right? So there's just ways to cope with once you have an idea of what those triggers might be. But because I had that meets one of the qualifiers in the DSM-5. Okay, so let's look here. Okay. Some of this I'm going to skip right over because I talked about, some of the triggers can be visual or sound or sensory cues, flashes of light or something that you see on TV or something that you hear. I used to cry with the Star Spangled Banner because I was thinking then about the Marine Corps, which then made me think about the guy who caused this distress. It was ridiculous. It was a chain of events. If I look back, it sounds silly. The Star Spangled Banner is something I'm extremely proud of. I used to cry out of pride, and now I still do because I've worked through it. But that's how fast something simple, something can lead to that chain of events that cause distress and it caused fear. So, um, we also have what we call avoidance symptoms. Um, Not wanting to be exposed to anything that reminds you of the traumatic events. This is natural. A mental health professional will generally help you explore the presence of some of these things. Fortunately, when I've had these, I have a good therapist. I worked in the therapeutic community. I would grab a friend that I knew that was specialized in trauma and said, okay, I know what's going on. Help me here. Help me work through it. We took some deep breaths. We used our practical skills. Thank God I had that. It's good to have somebody that you can call, you can reach out to when you're experiencing these things. My daughter was famous. If she could see those things coming in me, she would do her little happy dance, or she would, you know, do something to remind me and get me kind of out of that tunnel vision. Because when trauma happens, the only thing that's on my mind is that trauma, that fear, the how to escape, how do I deal with it, how do I get it out of my mind. So avoidance symptoms include a significant effort to avoid memories, thoughts, or emotions, a significant effort to skip places, people, objects, situations, or conversations about what happened. It gets a little easier when you get it out of the universe, but trauma feels like shame. Why did I let it happen to me? Why didn't I get out of it? Why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't I handle it differently? So talking about it for me has helped. You don't have to, and I'll talk about that in a different segment about, whether you can have conversations and relationships, because it does impact how we deal with friends, family, children, and significant others. Okay. So to prevent psychological distress, you might want to avoid anything that's linked directly to the traumatic event. So my struggle, because my relationship occurred for such a long period of time, that has made me very hesitant to let anybody get close to me. I have been very hesitant to feel feelings. I don't know that I can even put feelings to words. So while this is a immediate coping skill and to avoid those things, eventually whatever we suppress, we have to bring out and deal with. It's never going to completely go away. Our brain has a way of repressing things until we are prepared to deal with them. So while avoidance symptoms can be healthy internally, they are not a one all catch all. These are just symptoms that help us diagnose whether we meet the criteria for this diagnosis. Because mine are debilitating to the degree I can't think of anything else and I can't function in reality. Okay, so while it's natural to want to escape from things that give you negative feelings, it can make your daily life difficult. Not wanting to do things, not being able to explain why, it can constrain aspects of your work and social life. You know, not wanting to tell your full story. People are left with their presumptions or assumptions of what's wrong with you or what's going on with you. They can't possibly understand. And some things are private. Some people don't need to know the extent of your story, but they can know that you're struggling with something, and it's okay to say, I'm going through something right now. It's because of my past. I don't feel like it's something that I want to share right now, but just know that I'll be okay. I just need a minute to collect my thoughts and I'll be back. So it's okay to share those things, but I don't encourage you to share everything. That doesn't always help either. When you give people information, sometimes they feel compelled to want to fix you, when all we really need sometimes is just somebody to listen. Okay, so how does PTSD change your thoughts and moods? It changes the way you feel about yourself, and life may change after a traumatic event. The things you tell yourself about the world might also make you different. How I perceive myself. I had this experience. It makes me question whether certain people that I allow into my life I shouldn't have. If I have a particular type, and it hasn't ended well for me, I might think that I have done something wrong. And there's some things that I have done wrong. I overlook some red flags because, I want to see the goodness in people and so forth. But in hindsight, there could have been some preventative measures, but you don't know what you don't know. We operate off of the information that we have at the time we make decisions. And when we are living in a chaotic situation and when there's trauma involved, we don't know which way is up. So don't blame yourself for not being logical during those times. When we're in survival mode, when we're protective mode, sometimes we can't. It's raw. My example about where I would disassociate, I would remove myself from things because I couldn't make sense of it. So, tell me to make a logical decision in a time of crisis. I didn't even really know what the crisis was because my brain had already checked out. If I was in a different place, in a different time, different temperament, the outcome may have been different. However, the trauma still would have occurred. Okay. So, one thing that I've experienced in other people that have trauma, according to the book, this would be one of the criteria that helps you determine whether you have PTSD or not, is called dissociative amnesia. That's the blocking and not wanting to remember or not remembering the event at all. Intense negative feelings about yourself, others, the world in general. Intense negative feelings like horror and fear. I have intense fear. And my fear doesn't come across as I'm afraid of something and I'm shaking. My fear comes across as I'm angry. I'm angry. I yell. I scream. I freak out. I tense up. Mine manifests as fear. Yours might look a little different. Some people hide. There's different ways that we cope with trauma. Another symptom is an inability to enjoy things and have positive emotions. I struggle with this too. I feel like I don't deserve to have positive emotions, and I don't really know how to have them. I like certain things, but they don't truly bring me joy. I like music and I like listening to it. But, before the trauma, I used to get excited when a song came on, or, I would feel happy because of the lyrics. I don't have that. I find it difficult to find things like on television. I used to binge watch series of things. I can't focus on things. I can't tell you the things that I like. I have things that make me. So I was talking about the symptoms that might be persistent if you have PTSD. So I was talking a little bit about the feelings of horror and fear. Next on the list is decreased interest in socializing and participating in usual activities. So I used to be a social butterfly. I used to like to get out and hang out with friends and do normal things like, go shopping, go get coffee, go see my friends, go for a drive. I used to enjoy the little things in life because when I feel debilitated or if I'm still working through some significant trauma issues, I avoid all those things. I don't leave my house. I have found myself cutting off my friends. They're persistent buggers and keep trying to call me, even though I'm probably the worst friend ever, but they haven't given up on me because they know who I was. They know what I've gone through and they know what I'm capable of. They haven't given up on me. So PTSD can make you feel more sensitive or negative than before. It can make you look at yourself and the world around you in dramatically different ways. You may feel like you're not good at making decisions or that you shouldn't be able to trust anyone ever again. I went through that. I chose this particular person to be in a relationship with. How do I know I'm not going to choose somebody that's going to be just like him? I am afraid to make decisions. When I did make decisions, I was sometimes impulsive and spontaneous. Sometimes my best memories are when I was spontaneous. Now, because of what happened and because of the trauma, I find myself hesitant to make those decisions without a plan. I will dissect, I will plan for every possible outcome to the degree that I self sabotage the plans in general. I am so busy trying to plan for if I do this, this will happen. This might happen. How might this happen? So much to the degree you can't plan for everything, but I stall and delay and make it so I don't have anything happen at all. So I avoid making decisions. I get stuck in it. So that's one thing that might occur. If you have somebody that's very indecisive and that's a new behavior and they've experienced trauma, don't be so hard on them. Give them time to process through it. But sometimes you just got to be impulsive and jump right in. I'm working on that. But if I tell somebody that I'm struggling and they say, just do it, I might be resistant and defensive. So it's just a hard thing to deal with. Okay, depending on what happened, you may okay, we're going to go on to the next one. Um, there are reactivity symptoms of PTSD. After a traumatic event, you may start noticing changes in how you react to certain situations. Two or more of these symptoms from this list must be present. Again, this is in the DSM-5. Irritable behavior and unprovoked anger that may include physical or verbal outbursts. So I don't experience anger. However, my intense fear presents as anger. So I meet the criteria. Behaviors that may put your safety in jeopardy. Some people take unnecessary risks, right? I don't know that I do that necessarily. However, that is something that does occur when you have trauma. So think of those folks that return off of the military deployment that came from a lawless situation, that have been in a state of chaos, and then they bring them back, then put them back at home. They don't know what to do with contentment. They don't know what to do when things are calm. Those folks drive fast. They take unnecessary risks. Sometimes they're promiscuous. They take on all of those dangerous behaviors because that feels more natural than the being calm, the being home, the not having that chaos in their lives. So being hyper alert or vigilant about the surroundings, again, being acutely aware, knowing everything that's going on, paying attention to the details, knowing who's in the room, what their behavior is. We have an acute awareness of what's going on in our surroundings. It's a protection mechanism. Again, we talked about the startle mechanism. We have that. Difficulty concentrating and focus on any task. I have a difficulty focusing if I present that there is danger in the room or in my environment. I have a hard time focusing on this if I'm so concerned what's going on around me. Okay, and changes in sleep pattern. This is a really big one. I avoid sleep. Without medication, I don't sleep. Even with medication, sometimes I don't sleep. Sleep patterns. Sometimes people with trauma sleep too much because then they don't have to think about what they've gone through. Some people avoid sleep like me. So trauma does change that sleep cycle. That's okay. There's ways to deal with it. It just takes an awareness and then having somebody assist you with that. Um, changes in your Okay, being able to detect threats in your is part of your survival instinct. You may notice you're more sensitive to potential threats than before. Again, I talked about that hypersensitivity and that hypervigilance. So, how is PTSD diagnosed? Because we all experience different life events and react differently. PTSD doesn't look like the same for everyone. A good and thorough mental health professional will also spend time talking about your concerns, medical and personal history, the recent events and symptoms. This is not something that should be diagnosed in a 15-minute session. You need somebody that you trust so you can open with to explain what your experiences are. There's no shame in it, but you've got to find the right person that you feel that you can trust. If you don't find somebody that's willing to take the time to make eye contact, to build rapport, that you feel is ready to hear your story, then try to find someone else. Stop there, move on. There are some good therapists out there, and if you find the right one, I promise you it will make all the difference in your world. Okay, so because what's traumatic for one person might not be traumatic for another, not all things are debilitating. So, mental health professionals will help rule out if it's something that's maybe going on related to one core event and whether it's going to be a lasting impact. Um, just because you don't have clinical PTSD and meet all the diagnostic criteria, you can still have a few of the symptoms: the intrusive thoughts, the nightmares, the startle reactions, and the numbness, the not being able to feel happiness or maybe even sadness. There's a difference though. There's chronic trauma, which can develop from prolonged exposure to distressing events, such as abuse, bullying, or domestic violence. Chronic trauma, one category. Then the next is complex trauma. Complex trauma is associated with exposure to multiple traumatic events, usually over a series of months or years. This type of trauma is thought to develop from ongoing stress in situations that are inescapable, like being held captive or experiencing repeated abuse during childhood. So it's over a long period of time, not related to necessarily one person. It can be a culmination of things. So it's a little bit harder to define between the two. Trauma is still trauma. It's just how we perceive things and treat things. So in my case, that's rooted in childhood that is manifested in different ways through my adulthood. Mine is more on the complex side. However, that doesn't mean that one size fits all. So it's hard to explain, and I'll try to be a little better about it in future videos. Okay. Right now there is PTSD. There is actually no diagnosis for what they're calling complex PTSD. What they're saying is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is this, and this is what it is. Because most of the symptoms and the treatment protocols do work. Complex PTSD is just a better explanation, and it's a new phrase that they will or maybe won't adapt because really I don't know if it's necessary. It's just a way of um, tailoring an approach, and for the person who's working with the individual to focus their efforts on multiple different areas instead of just one. So here's what happens. Um, for folks that maybe haven't had a direct traumatic experience, there's a thing called vicarious trauma. This is for empaths and people who work in the human services field. Sometimes when you work with folks that have experienced trauma, hearing the stories, seeing how they are impacted by their trauma, we can sometimes take on that trauma. It puts you at risk. Usually over a series of months or years, this type of trauma is thought to develop from ongoing stress in situations where you're hearing things, seeing things, taking care of people that are dealing with struggles in life. Um, those at risk include mental health professionals and first responders, those who witness a loved one going through symptoms of trauma. They also may develop some of the symptoms that look a lot like PTSD. So my encouragement to you is, if you've got things that you need to work through and you feel like you're prepared to do that, find a professional or find somebody that you can trust. I'm going to do specific segments about how to approach things in relationships with friends, significant and others, and maybe how you attach or detach from things in future videos. But if you do feel like you've had enough things that you need to work through that you've suppressed or have started to come to the surface where it's impacting your daily life, do go seek a professional. They'll tell you whether or not, whether you meet the diagnostic criteria. And that doesn't mean it has to stick with you forever. It doesn't mean it's a permanent label. It just helps you understand why maybe you react to certain things. It's helpful for me to know that when I go into a state where I'm having a flashback, I understand why it's happening. And by using the techniques, the coping skills that I've learned through learning about trauma, I can usually work my way through it. So I want you to know that there is hope. Our brain is resilient. Even though it may have suppressed things and kept you safe, it will also give you the strength to address, work, and then avoid having to deal with these things in such a debilitating way. So have hope, right? Even therapists need therapists. So with education becomes awareness. So it maybe will help you understand and explain to the people that don't understand around you why these things have impacted you in such a debilitating way. But what I'm going to reinforce, and I will say this 1,001 times, if somebody ever says, just get over with, it never works. Never, ever, and I'm going to say this in a way that my friends will appreciate, never, ever, never tell anybody who's experienced trauma just to get over with. We don't just get over it. We need help. We need guidance. We need support. We don't need you to fix us, but we need sometimes for you to listen to us and understand. So, words of wisdom. Keep following along. If you'd like to add things to your comments or share your stories, mine might make any sense to you. Mine makes some sense to you. This is just a general overview. So please do give me some feedback. Please do like, subscribe, and follow along, because this is a good way for you to understand that you're not alone in this. So stay strong, be your best you, do the best you can, get things out in the universe when you feel safe. Reach out to your support group that loves you and knows you, and that will maybe even recognize when you go into your trauma space, because you need them. You can't go through this alone. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.